Everybody, welcome back to another edition of the Audible. Sigmund Bloom here. Cecil Lammy is on assignment, hosting the Power Grid. Always enjoying getting to be with my DFS brothers here. And I've got to say, first of all, Week 15, it's a big week in the season-long fantasy football, but it's a big week in DFS. It is actually the FanDuel Live Final in LA. Last year, Austin and Devin made it. And just because football guys, we believe in sharing and spreading the wealth. This year, it's John and Jeff. So that's, I guess, the qualifications to be on the show. We have Ryan Hester here as a special guest. But Jeff, John, you're in California already, and Jeff, you're on your way tomorrow? Or yesterday?
Friday morning's my flight.
Yeah, I came out a day early so that I could get used to, the weather and the West Coast time, and just kind of get acclimated because these live finals, they can become, especially if you're a social guy. I don't know whether I'd classify myself as that, but I like to think I am. They're a little crazy, so I want to get all my stuff done before everybody else gets here.
Yeah, this is like the West Coast team traveling east, like you're adjusting to the time zones. Like you said, you get into your favorite restaurants, you're going to Philly, get a Philly cheesesteak or something. Get that all out of the way before business. Let's get down to business here. And this is obviously a very interesting slate. Like John getting ahead of the weather because it is going to be a very cold, frigid weekend. Not in Atlanta, not indoors in Atlanta. John, I'll start with you. Atlanta has the highest implied total of the year against San Francisco. So when we think about how this pie will be sliced up, how do we get the biggest piece?
Yeah, it's probably the question of the weekend, Sig, and it's something that as I'm making out what could be $1 million lineup, I'm struggling with. It's you've got 33 points implied team total for the Atlanta Falcons this week, which is the highest that we've had all season. And so distilling this down into who gets what could be the difference. For Jeff and I, it's $1 million difference this week. So I really have been tearing it apart. And quite honestly, I might be largely fading this game. And that may be a mistake, but if Julio Jones does not play, and I don't think that he will against a team that has one win this season, I think that they'll just sit him this week. Shanahan knows that they can win this without him. Then it's going to be a whole lot of everybody. I think we're going to see Devontae Freeman have a big game. I think Tevin Coleman can have a big game. Matt Ryan can have a big game. Taylor Gabriel can break another one. Mohamed Sanu is a guy that if we're talking about any of them, he's probably the one I like most in daily fantasy because he is cheapest and he's a guy that sees quite a bit of volume. But the truth is all of these guys could end up with a touchdown and none of them could reach value. And so from my perspective, the way I'm approaching this is just looking at their salaries. They're all very highly priced. For me, I think that if I'm going in the running game, it's going to be Freeman. And to be quite honest, there's no rhyme or reason for that because last week Coleman had a great week. And so I'm I'm like a roulette bettor at Vegas. It was black last, so it's got to be red next. That's how I'm looking at it. But I do see Freeman having a decent game. But in terms of staking everything on it, this is not the game you want to do it. I think that there are better games, and I'm sure we'll talk about them over the course of the next hour. And it's a shame because everybody wants a piece of that 33-point team total. But if they're distributing amongst 5 or 6 different players, it's really tough to plant a stake in the ground and say, this is where I'm going with it.
33 points is 11 Matt Bryan field goals.
Yeah.
Hey, kicker talk early. I thought that was my stake.
Yeah, that is Pasquino.
Vic Beasley gets a safety in there. Maybe the answer is where it all intersects, Matt Ryan. And this is definitely a week that it's hard to find any kind of shelter at quarterback. You might be seeking shelter. Devin, since you spoke up, I'll go back to you. Cold weather again. I think, in Minnesota, it's going to be cold, but they're going to be indoors. But in Chicago, forecast in the single digits, Kansas City, frigid, cold. And, I guess we can say, the weather, if there's no wind or precipitation, maybe it won't affect us. But the cold does tend to slow things down. How's that affecting your approach to the Green Bay Chicago game and the Tennessee Kansas City game.
Yeah, I'm actually in Chicago. So the high here is -3 as of the news that I just watched a few days ago or a few hours ago. And the wind chill is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of -15 to -20. Why I live here, I'm not really sure. But for football, it's not really that good of weather. So we always talk about cold typically doesn't matter. When it gets this cold, it matters. And you have a Chicago team that really has nothing to play for. I mean, they're trying to lock in that third or fourth pick in the draft, and ultimately this is kind of a game where it's not really that enticing to start anybody. So in Kansas City, it's a little bit different because those teams still have something to play for. But at the same time, I think it's hard to throw the ball because the ball is going to be so hard. Tom Brady likes his balls deflated. Well, when it gets cold, the ball is going to be as hard as a rock, and it hurts the kickers a lot too. So avoid the kickers in any sub 32 degree weather. Not to mention kickers again. I'm sure Jeff is loving it, but to me, it's the running games are a little bit intriguing in these games, but the passing games are just off completely.
Yeah, Tennessee and Kansas City are both teams that are inclined to be conservative as it is. So that will encourage them to just clench in the middle of the ring for 15 rounds. And with Green Bay and Chicago, we saw a few weeks ago a similar game in Chicago. I'm calling him the snowplow, Jordan Howard maybe. This is Jordan Howard weather. We've got a Saturday night game, Saturday Night Fever, Jeff. Some intrigue here as Miami goes and faces the Jets. The once vaunted Jets run defense gets a lot of J.J. and perhaps Bilal Powell. Day in the Sun expands to be 2 weeks and have his own night in the football calendar.
Yeah, that's a shame that game's on Saturday night because that's a game where you got two players that are pretty good value. You've got Powell and you've also got Robbie Anderson. And those would be really great to get those in your lineups for on the main slate, but unfortunately they're not. So you got to treat this game like a Thursday or a Sunday morning one-off. That if you're going to be playing slates that get these players in, unless you're expanding through the entire slate from the Thursday to Monday, which have already kicked off. But if you're going for the full slate, you're targeting these players, and they're going to be more highly owned because the reason you're playing those slates is to get those players in. So just understand that unless you have to have a strong take either on Robbie Anderson and or Bilal Powell to play in those slates. If you fade them, do so. You'll probably have good exposure because lots of people are on them. But if you want them, you have to use them because you'll be highly owned.
Maybe the biggest matchup in terms of marquee value, even though it doesn't include Peyton Manning anymore, New England going to Denver this week, Austin, to Brady or not to Brady, to Patriots or not to Patriots. And Trevor Siemian threw the ball 51 times last week. That's interesting. What's interesting to you about this game?
Yeah, I think the Denver side of this is interesting to me. Their running game is really struggling, and so they're having to shift more of their offense to the passing game. And New England's defensive strength is against the run. So this actually plays kind of well into Denver's strengths here. So I like Siemian this week, and I like his two pass catchers, Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas. I would not touch the Denver running game at all. It is a train wreck right now. In terms of New England, you might be able to sneak Brady into some GPPs. He might be a little bit less owned because Denver defense is sort of known as being tough, but I don't think they're quite as tough as their reputation is. I don't think I'll have high exposure to Brady and his pass catchers in GPPs, but I think you have to at least consider it and get a little bit of exposure if you're doing multiple lineups.
And, of course, we've got to remember Matt Ryan went into Denver this year. And while he didn't have a big game, Tevin Coleman, isolated. I know Denver's linebackers are banged up right now. Tevin Coleman had a massive game, 4 for 132 and a touchdown as a receiver. So immediately James White, Dion Lewis, just throw a chip in there on the one of those connections coming through. When we look at Oakland, San Diego, Ryan Hester, special guest this week. When we look at this game, it was 34-31 the first time around out in California, Southern California, less likely to be affected by weather. Oakland has something to play for. These late season divisional games usually are spirited affairs. Who will lift our spirits in this game?
Well, I think for San Diego, the big story of the whole game is Melvin Gordon is very, very unlikely to play right now. So you have to look at Kenneth Farrow. He's cheap. He's unknown, probably for good reason. He was an undrafted free agent, but he does have good value. Devin, I'm not recommending him yet. I'm just saying you have to look at him at least to begin the process. But Farrow, he should get the lion's share of the touches. He may be splitting work with Ronnie Hillman as a passing down back, so that has me a little bit tentative. But I do see the Oakland passing game being an asset here. San Diego is a tough matchup if you just strictly look at defense versus position for quarterbacks, but they're actually eighth in pass yards allowed. And that DVP rating is a little bit lower because they're tied for 18th in passing touchdowns allowed. So, there could be some regression there in terms of passing touchdowns. That makes me like Derek Carr a little bit. He won't be playing in the frigid Kansas City weather this week. And again, we have to pick a cash game quarterback this week, right? I mean, there's got to be somebody. So why not take a guy in a game with a high total that's going to be played in nice weather against a reasonably suspect defense. So Carr is the guy I'm leaning on most here out of anybody in this game, but I do think it will have some production all around.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. That's one of the stories as we move on to Vegas, as we work our way through what we've gleaned from Vegas. And one of the stories in the background, and it makes sense with the weather. It makes sense with some of the unknowns, teams starting to drag on offense, that a lot of the totals are low, which again is why we're looking at shootouts, why maybe people are drawn to that Atlanta game. What are you drawn to, Ryan, when you look over the data coming out of Vegas this week?
Well, typically a big part of the process for us, DFS players is just to look for these high totals. But, this week we maybe have to get a little more old school, a little back into the pre-DFS days when we kind of evaluated players based on matchups and defense versus position, and we didn't use the team totals as a method of evaluation. With all of them being so low and so bunched together, and then weather being a factor in some of the games where they are, where there are semi-decent totals, we just have to look for matchups and almost throw the team totals out the window this week. Colin Kaepernick, for instance, has a very low team total in San Francisco, but Atlanta gives up the most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks out of anybody in the league. So, and Colin Kaepernick has kind of been a garbage time hero this year. So team total, be darned there. I'm recommending Kaepernick as even a cash game play. So that's the kind of thing we maybe need to just change the way we evaluate our games this week with so many low totals on the board.
Confidence in players. I wouldn't want to play Colin Kaepernick in a season-long semifinal, but
I am.
Cash game or yeah, well,
maybe two actually.
And look, I mean, the thing is, you can tell yourself a story. I'm a big tell yourself a story that Colin Kaepernick, just in the second half, after he falls behind 28-0, has one of the best quarterback games of the week, because just doing projections and rankings of football guys for quarterbacks this week, we don't have a high level of confidence in most quarterback plays. So why not just go with somebody that's cheaper who may allow you to splurge at other positions when you're setting your DFS lineups this week? Austin, what is Vegas telling you?
Yeah, it's an interesting week for Vegas. We've got half of the games are under 42 points or at 42 points for a total. And so ordinarily we'd sort of look at those games and be like, I'm just going to throw those games out and look at the others. But like Ryan said, you can't exactly sort of blanket do that. One of the high point total games, though, that I am looking at is I think this Arizona versus New Orleans game has a lot of shootout potential. New Orleans on the road has been up and down a little bit, but the overall total on this one is 50.5 points. I like Carson Palmer this week as a potential cash game play in a week where it's tricky to find cash game quarterbacks that you're 100% confident in. I really don't think New Orleans passing defense will be able to slow him down, and I think that David Johnson has a nice bounce back game here after kind of a mediocre outing last week.
And of course, another one of those games that won't be affected by weather. Jeff, you'll be heading out to California weather. Other than the weather, what are we looking at? By the way, I just want to toss out there, since you brought up Arizona and New Orleans, I like the idea of doing an all dome lineup, and it's just basically a wager that the weather is going to cause a lot of games, and we can't necessarily know exactly which ones to come in under expectations. We know that dome games in those ideal conditions can come through. What can come through when you look at Vegas, Jeff?
Yeah, I'm looking at one particular dome game. I'm looking at is Minnesota and Indianapolis. I think the Indianapolis defense is very suspect. I think there's potential to be had by taking Minnesota. The defense could be a nice play. I really like the tight end in that game. Sam Bradford's a sleeper in GPPs. But the other teams, I think that Buffalo's going to be overlooked as well because that total is not too high, but they're going to stomp all over Cleveland. So I think there's points to be had in the Buffalo game. But you're right, it is a trickier week to use Vegas here. But I think a lot of this is where you get to be contrarian by not being crazy, by just skipping over the first two running backs. I think that's a lot to be said this week.
In those cold weather games, you mentioned Buffalo. It looked to be a LaShawn McCoy game. It could be a Isaiah Crowell game. Lots of running backs to choose from. Lots to look through when we head into Week 15. John, I know you're poring over everything with that jeweler's eye, even a little bit tighter than usual. What do you see?
One thing that I see that I'm actually curious, maybe throw this out to the larger group after I'm done talking about it, is Le'Veon Bell. He's on DraftKings. He's had 5 consecutive weeks of 26 or more points. He's about $10,000 in the 9,800, and he's just a shadow less than that on FanDuel this week. And the Pittsburgh Steelers team total, from my liking, is a bit lower than I would like to see for a guy that I'm going to spend $10,000 with, or for, excuse me. And so I guess it comes down to the question, do we believe that Antonio Brown will continue historically, because he's always been shut down by the Bengals? Always a strong word, but I think that the data support that premise. And do we think that all the points then go to Le'Veon Bell, and that's why he's so highly projected this week? Or are his projections a bit high for a guy who is priced at 20% of your overall salary on DraftKings and 16 or 17% on FanDuel? For me, I mean, I'm writing up tips and picks right now. It'll be available tomorrow night. As of now, Le'Veon Bell is a cash game play, but there's a part of me that wonders whether or not that could be fool's gold this week because of the lower team total for the Steelers, when a guy like David Johnson's a few $100s more, as much involved, and has a team total about 4 points more than the Steelers.
Well, go ahead.
I came across something on Bell today, and you know I'm not the one in California, so take it with a grain of salt. but you know, there have been, since 2013, there have been 20 games in which both Ben Roethlisberger and Le'Veon Bell were active. 20 games at home and 20 games on the road, so 40 games. In those games, in the home games, Le'Veon Bell has 7 rushing touchdowns. Road games, 16 rushing touchdowns. Conversely, in the 20 home games, Ben Roethlisberger, 49 passing touchdowns, 27 passing touchdowns on the road. So we all know the Big Ben home road narrative. But, you know, the Steelers still score on the road. They just do it in different ways. Last week was evidence of that. The Steelers obviously are in a position, real football-wise, where they need games. They need every win they can get. There's 3 left, 1 against the Ravens. They have a 1-game lead. Bell's the best player they have, and they have shown absolutely no hesitation to, you know, ride him. Maybe not into the ground, but he's certainly getting the workloads that make him a viable cash game play. And then with David, I still like Bell better than David Johnson as well. New Orleans over the last 5 games is letting up 2.85 yards per carry. So their run defense has gotten a lot more stout. And I actually disagree with that game being a shootout. I think that one comes in under the total. So I like Bell better than David Johnson for those couple reasons.
So I would say that I would dispute that Bell and David Johnson have similar levels of involvement at this point, because actually Bell has, in the last 4 games, 3 games with 35 or more touches, and Johnson over that span hasn't eclipsed 30. And then again, this is where Ryan and I are telepathically yinzering here, because you saw Ben Roethlisberger on the road. I don't know if it's like sleeping away from home or, you know, something in the water. His circuits will go on the fritz sometimes. At points in the game last week, he looked like he was dialed in. And then when they would get to the red zone or in the one pass on his side of the field, he just would inexplicably throw it directly to a Buffalo Bill. And you saw in the second half, the Steelers started giving Bell like 7 out of 8 plays on an 8-play drive, and they were drives that ended with Bell touchdowns. So, like Ryan's saying, they want to win. They're not going to trust Roethlisberger. They're going to trust Le'Veon Bell. Anyone else want to chime in on Le'Veon Bell before we move on? All right, Devin, Vegas, what stands out?
I think the one thing that shocks me that no one has mentioned yet is the Tampa Bay versus Dallas spread. So Tampa Bay has been one of the best defenses over the last 4 or 5 weeks. Dallas is projected to score 27 points in this game. So I'm not really – and they looked – Dak Prescott looked like a rookie last week. So that's probably the game that stands out the most to me as far as I just throw my hands up in the air and don't understand it. Do we trust Dak? Do we trust Ezekiel Elliott? Do we trust Des Bryant? They're going to have to get 27 points somehow, and I'm struggling to find where those 27 points are going to come from.
And I think that for a savvy DFS player right now, and this is something that you can exploit on many levels, some of these lines, some of these approaches to teams are based on a season-long outlook. But really, as you mentioned, Tampa Bay's defense, look over the last 3 or 4 weeks. That's how we should be evaluating them as a matchup right now. Look at Dallas's offense over the last 3 or 4 weeks. That's the offense we should be evaluating. And I do think that if you're looking at just the short-term trailing instead of over the entire season, you can find some of these gaps that you can exploit. Now we're going to move on. I'm going to step through position by position here. And, of course, we have in the quarterback picture – Devin, in the background, just not a lot of confidence. Whether it was DFS or season long, last week there were a lot of landmines that folks stepped on. And not just landmines randomly, some that we were induced into playing and thinking that we had some good plays last week. So how do you navigate the minefield in week 15?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I was on Drew Brees quite a bit last week, and he killed me. But I think this week is a tough week because you have a lot of games that, as we mentioned, there's a lot of weather games. There's a lot of low totals. I'm probably paying up for Matt Ryan. In cash games, I am, but in GPPs, I'm probably avoiding him because, as we mentioned, his ceiling isn't that high. It's they're going to run the ball with Coleman. They're going to run the ball with Freeman. But in cash games, I think he's the safest play of the day. In GPPs, I'm probably looking towards a player like a Tyrod Taylor against Cleveland. We mentioned that they're going to score a lot of points. And Cleveland's pass rush is absolute. As a Browns fan, it's absolutely horrible. So whether it's I like McCoy in this game too, but Tyrod Taylor has the upside of, he has the upside of a lot of as high of an upside as there is in with his rushing ability. I think that we start to see that again this week, just because the Cleveland pass rush is that bad, and they're projected to score a lot of points. So with McCoy still not 100% healthy, I think that he's going to be turned to quite a bit.
John, let's look over the quarterback position again. Confidence is not high, but you're going to have to make a decision this weekend. Everyone's going to have to make decisions at quarterback, and they have to not necessarily have the warm fuzzies. How do you deal with that when you're picking your quarterback this week? So the warm fuzzies component, Matt Ryan, we'll go back to him. He's 8,500 and 7,300 on the major sites this week. And to me, there's a very strong possibility that a lot of these touchdowns come through the grounds. They're playing the Niners, for crying out loud. The Niners are historically right now one of the worst rush defenses in the NFL. If they decide that all they want to do is run the ball, Matt Ryan will suck up a bunch of your salary, especially on DraftKings this week, where the algorithm is much tighter than it is on FanDuel, and you'll be sunk. And so for that reason, I think this week I'm trying to save at the quarterback position. And I just poo-pooed on Devin there, and he and I do that a lot recently. But I will say that I completely agree with the secondary choice of Tyrod Taylor against the Browns.
Taylor, I wrote it up earlier today, and the exact numbers here aren't in front of me, but I'll paraphrase and say that I think that he has 15 or more fantasy points in 11 out of 13 games this season, and he needs about that many fantasy points to reach cash game value on DraftKings. And he's going up against the Cleveland Browns defense that continues to get shredded through the air. I mean, they get shredded every way, let's be honest. But certainly they're giving up a lot of fantasy points to quarterbacks. I think the second or third most in the entire league. And Taylor is only 5,300. And let's not forget that Buffalo, as of Thursday evening, I think they have the 6th or 7th highest team total on the board at about 26 points. So I'm all for him this week. And then the other guy that I'm looking at, and the only thing that gives me pause here, is the weather, and that's Alex Smith against Tennessee. We talk about very, very bad defenses. I mean, Tennessee continues to give up a lot of points to very bad quarterbacks. And we know that Alex Smith may not be very bad, but he's certainly not the type of quarterback that we tend to target in fantasy circles because his upside is limited. And I think that this is a week. He's getting back Jeremy Maclin, who last week came back and he was limited. This week he should be full speed. Tyreek Hill continues to do the things that he does to expand the field. Travis Kelce, I think, has 4 consecutive 100-yard receiving games. All the pieces are there for a big day, especially when we consider that Spencer Ware's been struggling to run the ball recently. This could be a week where maybe Alex Smith is a guy that you want to target against a Titans defense that's very susceptible to the pass.
Jeff, who do you want to target at quarterback this week? There's a way to talk yourself in or out of just about every quarterback on the slate.
Yeah, that's the problem. And I'm having the same problem that John Devin talking about Matt Ryan. And to play the counter argument here, Matt Ryan's thrown 30 touchdowns, and the both backs for Atlanta have rushed for 14 but also caught 4. So, and San Francisco is the second worst fantasy-wise against quarterbacks. So they give up a lot against the run. They also give up a lot against the pass, and we have a lot of points. So one way to capture a lot of those points is to take the quarterback and hope he distributes the ball, and maybe the running backs take a screen ball in or a screen pass and run it in, or you have Gabriel do similar things, or even Austin Hooper. Who knows? But the way to pivot that, I understand the downside. The downside is that Matt Ryan could lay an egg because of his entire ground game, but there's still 30-plus points. So I'm on the fence. Do I go with Matt Ryan and stick with it because he looks like the safest one because of all those reasons, or do I go with a cheaper quarterback which is more risky but may have better upside and he also gives me more money to spend? It's a tough call. It's a very tough call this week. It's probably one of the hardest decisions this week. It's right up there with picking your 2 running backs, and if you want to pay up for the 2 big guys or come down a little bit. But quarterbacks, that's the decision coming down. Matt Ryan is the top of my list. Most of the other quarterbacks that I would normally look at either have a bad matchup or they're not on the slate. So it's a tough, and the weather is an impact too. Aaron Rodgers, he's not healthy. He could be, it's going to be freezing. I do like the Alex Smith call. That's more of a GPP play to me, because I just can't see the upside. But then again, maybe he's safer in the cash game. He only needs 2x. So there's a lot of tough calls out there this week at quarterback.
Yeah, and I'll toss in my 2 cents on the Matt Ryan debate. When you're setting your lineup, you have a certain number of luxury items, and those should be the players you have the highest confidence in. And when you're looking over running back, wide receiver, tight end, and you can pick your luxury items and you have really high confidence in them where you don't want to set a line without them, then you go with a cheap quarterback. But if you can't find enough, then maybe you go to the shelter of Matt Ryan. And everything works against San Francisco. We know that. It's just a question of what plays Kyle Shanahan will call. I'm going to toss a couple of names out there I did not hear said. One is Trevor Siemian, 51 attempts last week. And I always say when you start a wide receiver, you're starting the quarterback. Well, when you're starting a quarterback, you're starting the wide receivers. So you like getting what Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas can do. And I know this is like eat your vegetables, but what about Sam Bradford? And Jeff's going to be happy. Blair Walsh had, 4 field goals last week?
Kai Forbath.
I'm sorry, Blair Walsh was gone. My brain wanted to put him back in there. Kai Forbath had 4 field goals last week. And then there was a goal line stand plus 2 other touchdowns. So Minnesota's moving the ball. And Indianapolis is far from a defense to fear. the Minnesota offensive line is maybe my one hesitation there. Let's move on to running back. Austin, what gives you hesitation? What gives you the red light and the green light running back this week?
Well, we've got a few injury situations that we're sort of looking at that could shake out to offer interesting values. But I think the biggest question marks happen at the top. We've talked about, David Johnson, Le'Veon Bell. The question is, can you get both of them in your lineup? Do you want both of them in your lineup? In a tight pricing week, I'm finding it difficult to get both of them in my lineup. I'm wanting more so to get the safety of Matt Ryan into my lineup, and so I'm dropping down at running back. One of the guys I'm finding myself dropping down to is actually Carlos Hyde. We ordinarily would shy away from a running back in this game script where he's going to be down by a lot. But Chip Kelly is one of the few offensive minds that keeps his running backs in the game, churning away, even when they're down by 2 touchdowns. And so I see Carlos Hyde getting a lot of work against a defense that is not very good against the run. So I see him getting a really good action this week. He's a guy I'm using heavily in cash this week. And then, we got to take a look at a guy like Kenneth Dixon, I feel like, on DraftKings, especially with that full point PPR. His salary is super cheap over there. And while other people might be looking more closely at, say, like Faro in San Diego, I think Kenneth Dixon could see a lot of great passing game action after sort of usurping Terrence West last week in the workload department.
Ryan, we look at running back, and I like the note you had, about being a little more old-fashioned about how we're evaluating our choices this week and just, looking at momentum and matchups. Certainly Carlos Hyde has a ton of momentum. Who has momentum at running back right now?
Well, he didn't score a touchdown last week, but I like Ezekiel Elliott, of course. He went over 100 yards, and the whole season has been his momentum. Devin noted the point spread in that game, so if you are inclined to listen to Vegas, the home favorite of a touchdown usually plays out well for the running back. LaShawn McCoy, of course. I mean, anybody going against Cleveland, they're going to be winning. They're a positive game script. McCoy is their whole offense in Buffalo, essentially. Buffalo scores something like, I think, low 40% of their total points are via rushing touchdowns, which is easily the most in the NFL. And they throw to him too. So even when we talked about Tyrod Taylor earlier, I kind of thought, well, maybe I'll do a Tyrod Taylor, LaShawn McCoy stack this week. So those are the guys that I would be doing. And of course, as I said earlier, I'm not getting off of Le'Veon Bell, but I will get off of David Johnson because of some salary relief. And I like that, third and fourth level guy almost just as much. And I'll save some money by picking those guys, mixing them in.
Jeff, I'm sure that as you're falling asleep, you have visions of sugar plums and DFS lineups dancing in your head this week. What running backs are dancing through your head?
Well, I've been trying to keep to my normal schedule. I have a lot of articles to write and get things that allows me to focus on what I normally do, the waiver wire, the game script. And I've looked at Dixon a lot. And being in the Baltimore area, I've heard the talk lately. There's a lot of annoyance with the way that the offense was run and how many check down throws were given to Dixon. Now, Dixon has pretty much passed West. We saw those number of snaps was about triple. The problem is that if they're going to be going back to the well and trying to throw a little bit deeper and getting off of all these checkdowns, then a lot of that PPR advantage to Dixon goes away. I still think when I saw Dixon play, he ran very hard. He got a lot of yards after contact. He was a very powerful rusher. I liked what I saw. I'm just not confident that he'll see enough touches against Philadelphia, who has done well on the road against the run and has done pretty well against the run overall this year. Running backs, I'm looking a lot at that group between 6,000 and 7,000 on FanDuel. There's a lot of names there. Farrow's mentioned, Coleman, McCoy. I like McCoy, but I worry about Gillislee. I think there's a little bit of worry about every of your top end running back. I feel most confident in. Blunt hasn't been mentioned. I think he's got a good matchup against Denver. And I like Hyde, and I think Howard is in play too. So all these guys in the 6,000 to 7,000 range, you take one of the top end guys you really like. You got to take a stance on one, take a stance on a second tier guy. That open up your ability to pay for some better wide receivers, which we're going to talk about next.
Yeah, I'm glad you talked about Blunt, because when you go inside the head of Bill Belichick, you're not going to take on an opponent at their strength. You're going to take them on at their weakness, and that's a lot of LeGarrette Blunt. Denver has given up some big games to running backs this year. And then when you think about that, of course, one of the big games came with Latavius Murray. And again, just a momentum play. The last time we saw Latavius Murray, he was the one thing that was working with the Oakland offense. He's playing well. And I love the Carlos Hyde keeps coming up, because in some ways we spend so much time poring over this and we just forget to watch the games last week. Who was kicking butt? It was Carlos Hyde. I feel like if I don't play Carlos Hyde this week, he's going to come to my house and step on my face or something. Let's go, John, to wide receiver. How can you step on your opponent's face this week at wide receiver?
So wide receiver is a very interesting position this week, because they're this is where cash games will be won and lost this week for sure. There just is not, in my opinion, a whole lot to love at the wide receiver position. From my perspective, what I'm likely going to do is spend down at quarterback, as I've already outlined. I'm likely to spend up at running back. I think you can get both Le'Veon Bell and David Johnson, or Le'Veon Bell and LaShawn McCoy into your lineups, and then find value at the wide receiver position. If I'm spending, quote, up, the guys that I like, I think Demaryius Thomas is probably in play against New England. New England's been pretty tough up front. They're funneling action through the air. And, we've seen them beat up on good defenses all season. So if this game is close, as you pointed out, Sig, Trevor Siemian should be in play. And Demaryius Thomas continues to be a highly targeted component of this offense. He just hasn't found the end zone. And I think that this could be a weekend where that actually happens. So I like Demaryius Thomas this weekend. Another guy that I like, and Devin's about to throw up the red flag, is Michael Crabtree. Crabtree is going to go up against the San Diego Chargers. The Chargers, this game has shootout potential written all over it. And, Casey Hayward has been a shutdown cornerback all season. Early in the season, he was switching sides. He was doing his thing. And then when Jason Verrett went down and when Brandon Flowers went down, eventually the Chargers realized that what they needed to do was to shut down the best wide receiver on the opposing team. And so they've been shadowing those wide receivers with Casey Hayward ever since that point in time. And he's done a tremendous job in doing so. And I think that this weekend we're going to see him doing the same thing to Amari Cooper once again. And all that overflow action will be going to Michael Crabtree, who's going to be running routes against Trevor Williams, who's been absolutely dreadful in coverage this season. And so I think that Crabtree is a spend-up option. Other guys I kind of have my eyes on that maybe I don't love as much, or maybe a better way of saying is they're not as talented. J.J. Nelson should benefit from the Michael Floyd news there in Arizona this week. Marquise Lee continues to be a guy that is making a name for himself in Jacksonville. Very cheap, and the opportunity cost is low. He's more and more used, and he'll go against lesser coverage in Houston. A secondary that's earlier in the season was much better than it's been performing recently. So, some hodgepodge mixture of those players is how I'm looking to build out my rosters this weekend.
Devin, it makes sense that in a week where we have a mixed bag of confidence in quarterbacks, we have a mixed bag of confidence in wide receiver. Who gives you confidence at the position this week?
Yeah, I agree with John that it's really tough this week. My only concern with Crabtree is that I don't view him as the best receiver on this, or I don't view Amari Cooper as the best receiver on this team. I view Crabtree as, and he's seen it in the targets over the last couple of weeks. So I'm actually in GPPs only. I'm actually going to be very heavily invested in Amari Cooper because the field is going to be heavily invested in Michael Crabtree. I don't think that there is a significant enough difference between the two receivers. And there's a decent enough possibility that Cooper, especially in the red zone, which Crabtree has been the primary guy, that Cooper will get the Trevor Williams matchup for part of the game. If he gets it for part of the game, he can still hit value, while I will also be running away from Crabtree just because of his ownership levels. Another receiver that I really like is T.Y. Hilton. This team could be without Dante Moncrief and Philip Dorsett, which makes it really difficult, and they're going to have to target Hilton a lot in this game. So he's gone over 100 yards in each of those games. Chester Rogers is another guy who I think could be intriguing if both of those players do end up scratching. He's minimum price across the board. And one more name that I'll throw out there is Larry Fitzgerald, just because with the Michael Floyd news, J.J. Nelson just has disappeared ever since he fumbled twice in that game a couple weeks ago when everyone was on him. I like J.J. Nelson as a GPP play, but I think the safer play is Larry Fitzgerald.
Austin, whenever you look in your crystal ball, you're forecasting wide receiver. Again, this is a tough week. There's not a lot that gives us clarity. What gives you clarity at wide receiver this week?
I'm not likely to be paying up for wide receivers in most of my lineups. I just don't really care for a lot of the wide receivers at the top of the scale this week. A lot of question marks, injuries, matchup concerns. Maybe the highest priced guy I would look at for GPPs is Des Bryant. Devin mentioned that Dallas has this really crazy high implied total according to Vegas. And I think that if it's going to go somewhere, I think I'd actually see Bryant get some of this action. Tampa Bay's defense has been super tough, especially against the run. So I'm actually fading Ezekiel Elliott this week. I think if Dallas gets it done, it's going to be through the passing game. But that's strictly a GPP play for me. We've got the cold weather games. I'm kind of avoiding all the receivers in those, even though it's exciting that Alshon Jeffrey is back this week. Yay. I'm not going to bite on that at all. Let's see. The other guy that might be interesting is Jordan Matthews. He's just sort of kind of plugs away, kind of a safe play each week, I feel like, and he's a guy that I'll find a way to get into some of my lineups as well.
Just add my parting thoughts at wide receiver before we move on to tight end. And I know the roulette better metaphor came up. I'll go to the craps table and say that, and I know we've touched on this game a lot already, but Taylor Gabriel has been coming through week after week. Basically, if you just ignore things like snap count or participation and you look at his production, what the story, the headline here is Kyle Shanahan knows how to use what Taylor Gabriel can do. And San Francisco, everything works against San Francisco. So on the plays, when Gabriel's number is called, chances are the plays are going to work. And we know when they work for him, he scores touchdowns. Speaking of scoring touchdowns, what about Brandon Cooks? Arizona's pass defense in the same monsoon that turned Carson Palmer into a puddle of mud. Ryan Tannehill threw 3 touchdowns before he left the game with a knee injury. Maybe we would think about Drew Brees as we talked about quarterbacks earlier, but I think, and also Arizona's been banged up in the secondary. Cooks is an interesting guy. Deshaun Jackson got back to his 80-yard touchdown ways. Carolina and their young secondary. How up will Carolina be for a Monday night game? And I know Jeff's going to like this one. Mike Wallace. What about Mike Wallace against Philly? I mean, come on. The Philly corners are really dragging. They're giving up long touchdowns a lot. This is Mike Wallace. And Mike Wallace has given you a reasonably high floor. He hasn't been a disaster in like the last 6 or 7 weeks. So moving on, Ryan. Tight end. And tight end's an interesting position because it's kind of coalesced and sorted itself out at this point. We've got 6, 7, 8 options that we have some level of confidence in, and then there's a few darts we can throw. How are you approaching tight end this week?
Yeah, tight end is tough. I'm kind of approaching it in a way that I'm doing it last, and however much money I have left is the guy I'm going to put in. So if I have some money left over, Travis Kelce is obviously a great play, just pure volume lately. He's red hot. Kyle Rudolph, again, another volume play. I think Jeff and I were chatting today. Jeff notified me of this, that he has 30 targets in his last 3 games. and Indy, hemorrhages points to tight ends. They also really, really made a concerted effort to get him a touchdown when I was watching their game against Jacksonville last week. They gave him a few red zone targets, and that could very easily happen again and be successful this week. I look at Devin's bare head and think of Ladarius Green. Sorry, Devin. He's got a great matchup against Cincinnati. They give up among the most receptions and yards to tight ends. The only issue there is, it's hard for me as the one touting Le'Veon Bell to say that I like Green as well, because when the Steelers did go run heavy, they took Green off the field, and he's not a part of the game plan if they're going to be running. But I do think he will have 6 to 8 targets and perhaps be able to do something with those. In that same game, Tyler Eifert's a good one too if you have money. Cincinnati's probably going to have to keep up. Eifert's their best weapon, assuming A.J. Green doesn't come back. And even if he does, who knows about his health. And if you're a narrative street person, Antonio Gates is close to a touchdown record, I've been told a few times this year. So maybe you sneak him in and get a touchdown out of him. So that's where I'm looking. It's kind of all over the board with tight end. It's just whatever I have left.
Yeah, and I think because of the level of confidence, it makes sense to get your highest level of confidence plays in other positions first. Jeff, again, I like that you're keeping your mind supple. You're just going through your routine. I know it's going to set in when you get on the plane, but maybe some names emerge from the fog at tight end before you start to feel the pressure. Which names?
Yeah, it's tough with some of the better matchups not in the main slate. So I think that I liked a lot of the names that Ryan mentioned, especially Rudolph and Kelsey. I think those are 2 top games. But I think if you're there's one thing I heard a lot is saving money. What I'm looking to see is who scratches for the Colts. If we have wide receiver issues with the Colts and Dwayne Allen's been kind of banged up and in blocking, Jack Doyle could be in play. So I don't know if he's a cash game. He is kind of borderline for me, but it might be pushing it. But if you're going to punt one position, that's the cheapest position to punt. You can go down to 4,500 on FanDuel there. So he's probably close to the minimum over on DraftKings. So I think that's one really good option to keep in mind, and that's probably my top savings guy to look at out of the tight end group this week.
I have another 4,500 guy to throw out there. Does anyone know what tight end had 17 targets over his last 2 games? That's minimum salary.
Jermaine Gresham.
No, Trey Burton.
Nope. Oh.
Trey. Okay.
Trey Burton had 10 targets last week. He had 7 targets the week before. He's not being used as a traditional tight end. He's being used all over the field. And I think he could cause the Ravens – I do like Jermaine Gresham as well, but Burton could cause some matchup issues this week.
Yeah, that plays into how the Eagles don't have any wide receivers.
Right.
Correct.
And Carson Wentz is throwing the ball like 40 or 45 times a game.
Over 100 times last 2 weeks.
Yeah, they want to reduce the – well, we know how that goes. Every team wants to run the ball more. What tight ends, John, what tight ends should we want in our lineups more this week?
I mean, I think most of what I'm looking at, everybody has talked about. Ladarius Green is a guy that I like. I continue to like. He's very, very highly used in this offense.
He's rubbing his head.
We see a much more streamlined Devin as a result of Ladarius Green's output over the past few weeks. I think he's being targeted something like 27% of the time that he's running a route, they're throwing the ball at him. So they're definitely integrating him into the offense. He continues to be in play. I think Eric Ebron is a guy that we should be looking at against the Giants for many of the same reasons that, going back to the aforementioned Ladarius Green, the exterior cornerbacks are so good there that a lot of that action is funneled towards the middle on these routes across the middle. So Ebron is a guy that definitely I'll be looking at this weekend.
I like a couple of other cheap tight ends just to watch. Just Trevor Siemian, and I see Devin rubbing his shaved head, and I think Trevor Siemian can handle the cold. He went to Northwestern, and Devin knows what I'm talking about. I think that A.J. Derby, with a high-volume quarterback, I think A.J. Derby's caught the last 10 targets that he's been thrown.
Revenge game.
Yeah, right. And by the way, this has nothing to do with DFS. Why would Bill Belichick trade a player to a bitter rival that they're going to play later in the year? That's the Belichickian move, right? To pick up someone the week of the game to get all the intel. So watch A.J. Derby drop the touchdown that would win the game for Denver. Belichick! He's a double agent. Ryan Griffin. TJ Fedorowicz has a
Fedorowicz might be
concussion.
out.
And Brock Osweiler can handle throwing to the tight end. We know that. Ryan Griffin has been converting his opportunities. And I want to just add, this ensures that Darius Green will do nothing. But watching the Steelers game last week, there was an emphasis on him again. I mean, they wanted to get him involved early. They were getting involved in the red zone and the end zone. There was a play when Roethlisberger made some time and Ladarius Green was free, like 25 or 30 yards downfield, and Roethlisberger missed him. And this does circle around to, well, if we feel uncertain about Roethlisberger on the road, then how does that work? But another thing adding into the Green narrative is the idea that the Bengals have been very good at taking away Antonio Brown. So that would leave Ladarius Green as the obvious option there. And we move on to kickers and defenses. We've already had a lot of kicker talk, and I'm sorry to the memory of Blair Walsh and to all Vikings fans that mourn him. Kai Forbath. Who wants to talk defense and kickers this week? All right. Austin, give us your kicker defense wisdom.
I had to study them this week, so I actually have a take. Normally, I don't. I just pick whoever I got left.
We have to let John go first.
Yeah, absolutely.
John,
He's like winking and smiling over there. I thought he was winking and smiling at us,
You
apparently.
have to let him go first now.
Yeah. Go ahead, John. What do you got?
I probably don't have a whole lot here that is very intuitive or tricky, but I think that the two kickers you have to look at this week are Matt Bryant and Kai Forbath. Matt Bryant, because they're 2 touchdown favorites. So you get late in the game and it's 4th and 2 from the 30. You're going to kick a field goal as long as they're winning, and there's no reason they shouldn't be winning. So the only drawback there is that he'll be highly owned and he's $5,100. But in cash games, ownership obviously doesn't matter so much. I like Forbath because the Vikings, as some of you have already pointed out, have one of the higher team totals on the week. I've currently got them at 25 points, which is about 8th highest on the board. They're favored to win by 5 points. Again, I like picking kickers who are playing on teams that are projected to win because they tend to kick field goals later in the game in those types of situations. And he's been kicking very, very good. And let's not forget that the Vikings are horrendous inside the red zone. They've got Jerick McKinnon, who they never give the ball to, and they have Matt Asiata, who, despite the fact that he has something like 17 carries inside the 5 this season, his conversion percentage is absolutely dreadful. So Forbath is another guy that I think you can look at. And I promise this will be the last time I ever talk about kickers.
Well, it's a good thing we have a lot of eagerness to talk about kickers and defenses. Austin, now dispense the wisdom.
I'm definitely on board with the Cobra Kai Forbath pick. I also like, if you're playing the Monday night slate, Hopkins, Washington's kicker, is a strong play there. You get a little salary relief there if you're dropping down from like a Matt Bryant. But I do like Matt Bryant as well. Let's move over to defenses. I think that there's a few picks that are a little more obvious cash-wise, but if you're going to go GPP, I might consider Green Bay in that cold weather game against Chicago. I could see a Matt Barkley cold weather implosion in this game, and Green Bay is relatively cheap compared to some of the other, maybe clearer matchups for defensive goodness. So don't lose sight of Green Bay as a potential play this week.
Jeff, what do you got on the kicker and defense front this week?
I'll take defense first, and I think the cash play is Buffalo against Cleveland. That's probably the number one. After that, a couple of GPPs. I like Houston against Blake Bortles in Jacksonville. He usually melts down most of the time this year. Baltimore against Philly. I think that's a game that Baltimore has to win heading into the Philadelphia-Pittsburgh showdown next week. Kickers, I like Matt Bryant the most. The reason I'm looking for indoor kickers with high totals is it gives me a piece of the Atlanta game. If you're fading the Atlanta game offensively, take the kicker. I think that's a great way to play that. I like the Hopkins pick. I like the Forbath kick. The Colts and the 49ers have given up some of the most points, I think, in the top 5 in kicker points against, which means they let people stall down and fall apart in the red zone. So I think that plays well into Forbath, who's $600 cheaper than Matt Bryant, which could really save you. And again, be mindful of weather if you're picking an outdoor kicker.
I'm going to throw one more in there, Dan Bailey. So with the Cowboys projected to move the ball, if the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense is as good as what we think, they may hold the Cowboys to some field goals. Vegas is not concerned about them moving the ball. I'm concerned about them getting in the end zone once they get it in the red zone. So I think he's a nice differentiator between Matt Bryant. The defense that I'm going with, it is going to be dreadfully cold here in Chicago, and Matt Barkley is a Southern California kid. He's not going to do well in cold weather. So I know Green Bay is not a good defense, but I'm going pretty heavily in Green Bay.
All right, it's time. Oh, Brian, you had something at defense kickers before we move on. What do you got at defense and kickers?
Yeah, my guys have been mentioned, but one thing that I like to look at this time of year, in particular with defense, is it's the only position you're picking a whole team. So I try to lean towards defenses that actually have something to play for this time of year. So, these defenses that have postseason aspirations as opposed to ones that, have already given up. Atlanta against San Fran wasn't mentioned either, but that's one that you might want to
red hot. And in Kansas City is always. Why would anyone be shocked if Kansas City doesn't find a way to have another defensive touchdown and or special teams touchdown? All right, Ryan, let's talk stacks. And with all the talk about quarterbacks and wide receivers, maybe this is more of a Chinese menu week, like one from column A, one from column B. Are there some stacks that you're focusing on?
Yes. So you mentioned Trevor Siemian, and my green black-eyed Joe went up very quickly. So real quick, a full list of quarterbacks that New England has shut down this year: Jared Goff, Landry Jones, the Charlie Whitehurst, Cody Kessler duo, and Brock Osweiler. Now, Siemian is not, his counterpart Tom Brady, but he's better than those guys. He's had a few 330-yard games, multi-touchdown games. I think it was Austin earlier said that, Denver has been, shifting to a little bit more of a pass-heavy approach. And if you can't decide who to stack him with, I would stack him with both Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders. They each have over 30% target market share over the last 4 weeks. They're both top 8 target market share of all receivers for the whole season. And neither of them have had fewer than 8 targets in a game over the last 7 games. So both of them have at least 8 targets over the last 7 games. And New England hasn't shut anybody down, like I said. So you've got a cheap quarterback. You have on FanDuel, I think, main slate, that's number 11 and number 14 priced wide receivers. So you're not spending a ton of money, and it'll allow you to, be pretty chalky and expensive elsewhere if you desire to.
Austin, any tasty stacks for week 15?
I got all kinds of tasty stacks. The one that I'll bring up 2 here. Let's talk about Carson Palmer and Larry Fitzgerald. I think that a lot of people are going to be looking to the savings of J.J. Nelson, and I think that sticking with Palmer and Fitzgerald here is a safe play in a game where I think that they're going to score a decent amount of points through the air. If you're going to go something a little bit less owned, you mentioned Mike Wallace earlier. I actually had on my sheet here, Joe Flacco to Mike Wallace. Philly's been burned by a lot of big touchdowns. I don't think a ton of people are going to be on Flacco. I like that pairing in GPPs.
I'll be watching the weather in Baltimore. Of course, there's some rain. It's kind of cold and rainy. Weather's going to be important. You're going to be in the California weather, Jeff. Do you dare stack with $1 million on the line? What stacks are you looking at?
I like the Baltimore stack. I would even throw Steve Smith on it again. Go harkening back to they want to throw deeper. And if on FanDuel, I like to take 2. If I'm going to double stack my receivers, I want to add up to less than 14,000. Steve Smith and Mike Wallace add up to 11-1. I'm sorry, 13-1. So it's a good cheap option there. 2 other ones I want to mention. Sam Bradford was mentioned earlier. If you're looking to save money, you could stack him with Rudolph and even Adam Thielen, who's seeing a lot of volume in that passing game. And Philadelphia is going to have to throw against Baltimore. That game could be a sneaky shootout because Jimmy Smith could be out again. So Wentz, I mentioned earlier, he's thrown over 100 times in the last 2 weeks. Jordan Matthews was mentioned earlier, and Zach Ertz could be thrown into that mix as well.
John, stacks upon stacks upon stacks on the line for you this weekend. What stacks are you looking at?
So I think one of the things we can do this weekend to be contrary, and it's something that people don't tend to do in daily fantasy circles with stacks, but on a weekend where I don't love a whole lot of wide receivers, maybe it's the weekend that we should be thinking about stacking tight ends. We went through tight ends, and I think the consensus amongst the 6 of us there were a number of decent tight end plays this week. And so, a guy like Alex Smith to Travis Kelce is a good example. Maybe Sam Bradford to Kyle Rudolph, who continues to be highly targeted in that offense. Even Carson Palmer to Jermaine Gresham. Excuse me. These are all very cheap, and they allow you the ability to get some of those higher end running backs that we all liked earlier in the show. And I think they'll be low owned because they're tight ends, and traditionally we don't like to stack our quarterbacks with tight ends. So that's just a way to zig this week when everybody else is zagging on a week that we don't love the wide receiver option. So don't be afraid to do a quarterback tight end stack on a week like this.
Devin, what stacks do you love in week 15?
Yeah, they've touched on a lot of them, but one stack that I do like a lot. It's going to be probably no one has talked about it anywhere that I've read, and it's kind of a narrative stack. It's Antonio Brown and Ben Roethlisberger. It's expensive, but there is the revenge game against Vontaze Burfict that he last year he was injured in the playoff game. So I think that if you can get Antonio Brown for under, what do we think, 10%, less than 10% owned, it's at least intriguing. I understand that he's struggled against Cincinnati, but at the same time, it's still Antonio Brown, and we've talked about how uncertain a lot of these wide receivers are. That's a stack that I won't have a ton of, but it's a stack that I think that I will have more than the field.
And as we make our way through the field, we go to departing shots. Again, John and Jeff, of course, I'm going to start with the TV starting with John. This is a week that you're hyper focused because of what's going on in the background. But of course, sometimes that allows some things to emerge from that background because you're focusing on your contest. Like Jeff was saying, going through your work sometimes can be meditative and take your mind off of that. So what's your parting shot for people that aren't necessarily going for the million this weekend?
Well, I mean, go any which direction. That's a good question, but I'll talk about two players who I didn't get to mention throughout the episode that I'm kind of high on this weekend. The first is Justin Forsett in Denver. I think a lot of people will be sleeping on him this weekend. He's the site minimum, especially on DraftKings. I think that's an area where I think that you can definitely slot him into your cash game lineups. I think his baseline is probably 3x, if not 4x, over there this week against the Patriots, who are actually really good against the run for what it's worth. I don't think it's a matchup-based exercise. For me, it's more about volume. I just don't think that the Broncos at this point in the season are believers in Devontae Booker. And I would not be surprised to see Forsett end up with 15-plus touches in this matchup. And if that's the case, I got to believe that he gets at least double-digit fantasy points. And for $3,000 on DraftKings, he's going to be in a lot of my lineups. The other person that I'll be looking at this week is Jordan Matthews for Philadelphia. Five of his last 6 games, he's had double-digit targets. And this week he'll go up against a Ravens defense whose best defensive cornerback, Jimmy Smith, has not practiced yet this week as of Thursday evening. Does not look like he'll play this weekend, and that's going to cause a lot of havoc in that defensive backfield. The tallest person they have in that defensive backfield outside of Jimmy Smith stands currently at 5'10". And Jordan Matthews, 6'3", will have at least a 5-inch advantage over everybody else. And that includes Sharice Wright, who was absolutely blasted throughout the early parts of the season, eventually benched. I think that we could be looking for Jordan Matthews to have a very good game at what I think are pedestrian prices across the industry. And to my knowledge, I haven't seen a whole lot written up on him this week. And let's not forget that Baltimore, really good up front. And if you're going to move the ball on them, you got to do it through the air. So all the pieces fit there for a big day from Jordan Matthews.
Jeff, parting thoughts as you're packing your bags for California?
Yeah, a lot of this, there's a lot of uncertainty this week, but I think that the chalk play and what's been the chalk play, a lot of people are rinse repeat. They want to get those two big running backs, and that's what they're going to be targeting this week. How do I squeeze those two running backs in? I think a very simple contrarian strategy is to come down one of those running backs, take a high end, take a lower end, take some middle wide receivers. You can get the Denver wide receivers. You can get Fitzgerald, you can get Tyreek Hill, you can get one of the Oakland wide receivers all in there. If you just come down at one of those running backs, take a gamble at one spot to allow you to give you a lot more value across the board. I think that's one of the things I'd like to advise. And again, going back to the weather, I really like the Kansas City mention that you had Bloom on the defense because Mariota, this is going to be the coldest weather game he's ever played.
He's from Hawaii.
That's right. He did play a game that was about 40 in the bowl game, and the weather did drop, but it's not like what he's going to experience where it's like 10 and dropping. So be very leery about that. I really like the Kansas City defense as a GPP this week.
Austin, you're nodding along. Piggyback on anything Jeff and others have been saying, and give us your parting thoughts for Week 15.
Yeah, I think that there might be some very little temptation to look at someone like Ryan Matthews this week. Don't. Wendell Smallwood has been ruled out. Darren Sproles may not play, and then you might be like, oh, cool, more opportunities. The Baltimore defensive front is for reals, and the Philadelphia offensive line is battling a lot of injuries. So don't go with Ryan Matthews this week. But one running back I forgot to mention that I do like as a GPP play is Lamar Miller. Going up against Jacksonville this week. We didn't mention him, so I just wanted to put that in there. He's kind of one of those, another mid-range guy that I think you can find somewhat low ownership on.
A lot of running backs with momentum. He obviously has momentum coming back to life. Last week, Ryan, how can your parting thoughts help people's DFS lineups come to life this weekend?
Well, to the point of the Kansas City defense, no team has allowed more defensive touchdowns against than Tennessee's 5. So keep that in mind. First I just want to say thanks for having me back again on the show, and best of luck to our colleagues. Hopefully they get some life-changing money this weekend, and failing that, at least a life-changing experience that they'll always remember. It's just super awesome. I can't wait to get the download from you guys on how the week went and your thought process and your lineup building and what went right, what went wrong, the wouldas and couldas. Hopefully there aren't any wouldas and couldas, but I'm sure we'll all talk about it throughout the coming weeks. But again, I liked Jeff's strategy of go contrarian with one lower tier running back. I'm really on Denver. I'm really on Trevor Siemian, and I'm really on the two receivers. I might even play cash lineups with both Sanders and Thomas. If those guys were on a different team, if they were on different teams, you would easily play both of them. They both profile as good cash game plays. So something to keep in mind. It's not the most common way to build a lineup with two receivers on the same team, but the matchup and the production and volume have been there. So but thanks again, and good luck, Jeff and John. Go get them.
And next year's our turn, since we're the only ones in this Brady Bunch grid, Ryan. I guess our turn next year. So join us for Week 15 in 2017. Devin, give us your parting thoughts, and also let us know what's going on at Hoops Guys.
Yeah, so I think this week it's a GPP week for me. So we've talked a lot about there's uncertainty across the board. So with uncertainty creates opportunity in the sense that I think people are going to gravitate towards the same players, and they're going to gravitate towards the running backs. They're going to gravitate towards the two running backs, Bell and Johnson, and then they're going to go cheap at wide receiver, and then they're going to go cheap at tight end, and they're going to try and fit a top quarterback in. So I think going away from that strategy is a very viable GPP play. Spend up on Odell Beckham or Antonio Brown or Julio Jones if he plays, and you can really create separation against the field. It's a very risky strategy, but it's a strategy that if those top-end guys who we've called out are very uncertain, if they fall, then you have a very good opportunity to win a GPP. So that's kind of the strategy I'm going to be going with this week. It may backfire completely like it did last week when Le'Veon Bell went for 50-plus points, but hey, all it takes is one, and it can make your season. So with that said, hoopsguys.com, we are about almost 2 months into the NBA season now, and with just about 2 weeks left of the NFL season, if you enjoy playing DFS and you don't have anywhere to go once the NFL season ends and you want to keep playing, hoopsguys.com is a great resource for all of your DFS information for NBA. So NBA the tournaments nightly are just astonishing how big they've gotten. They're almost to the point of a weekly NFL contest for some of them. So there's a lot of money to be won, and we are committed every single day to be helping out build your lineups. We have our optimizers, we have our projections, we have daily articles. We basically have everything that you need as a one-stop shop to build your lineups and help you learn the NBA game and help you succeed in the NBA game. So hoopsguys.com, check us out if you haven't already.
Yeah, life after football, all new puzzles to solve. We've got to keep our minds limber, as Jeff and John are this week, sending all of the best of luck their way, although they already had some pretty good luck on their side. Good luck to them. Good luck to you this week. I'll be back next week, actually. Extended stay here, and we'll get to check in with Jeff and John and check in with you. Thank you so much, everybody, for being part of the Football Guys community, giving us a chance to be part of your lives and part of your weekly preparation for DFS. Eyebrow, really, seriously. I want to hear about the eyebrow bet at some point.
There's no eyebrow bet.